The dust in the air tasted of finality. Each particle, a ghost of sandstone and marble, danced in the long, slanted beams of the late afternoon sun that pierced the grimy windows of my loft. My world was this dust. It was the rough, cool skin of the stone beneath my calloused fingers, the rhythmic tap-tap scrape of my chisel, the singular, obsessive pursuit of the form trapped within the block. For 11 months and 29 days, this was my sanctuary, my identity, my very soul made manifest in a 3-meter-tall sculpture I called Echo. She was almost finished. A figure, neither man nor woman, reaching not up to the heavens, but inward to its own hollowed-out chest. It was a monument to the self we cultivate in the quiet moments, the one we are when no one is looking. And in just under 7 hours, that self would be systematically, lawfully, and entirely erased. Tonight was the night of the reciprocity. The global phenomenon, the great equalizer, the societal cornerstone that had been law for over a century. At the stroke of midnight, universal coordinated time, every human being on the planet between the ages of 21 and 75 would be relocated. Not physically. Our consciousness, our awareness, our very essence will be digitally siphoned and transferred into the body of a randomly assigned stranger. For 365 days, you would be them. You would live their life, love their family, work their job, and sleep in their bed. And someone else, a stranger, would be living yours. It was sold to the masses as the ultimate exercise in empathy. Walk a mile in another's shoes, the old saying went. The architects of the reciprocity had simply made it a mandate. They claimed it had eradicated war, classism, and prejudice. How can you hate a banker when you might become one next year? How can you dismiss a farmer when you felt the ache in your own back from a day in their fields? It was a beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly intrusive idea. For me, an artist named Elian, it was a creative death sentence. My hands, my eyes, my muscle memory, all of it was tuned to the specific frequency of my art. To be ripped away now, with Echo so close to completion, was a pain sharper than any chisel. My entire year had been a frantic race against the clock, forgoing sleep, friends, and sometimes even food to pour everything I was into this stone. It was my magnum opus, the culmination of a decade of work, and I was going to miss its birth. Just a little more definition in the clavicle. I murmured, my voice a dry rasp. My throat was caked with stone dust. The chisel felt like an extension of my arm, the mallet a second heartbeat. Tap, scrape, tap. The curve of the collarbone began to emerge from the stone, delicate and vulnerable. It was the point of greatest tension in the piece, where the inward reach became a gesture of profound sacrifice. My wrist comm, a mandatory device for every citizen, buzzed insistently. I ignored it. It was probably another public service announcement, a cheerful, synthesized voice telling us to prepare our continuity guides for our successors. The guide was a digital file, a manual to your own life. Job details, passwords, family members' birthdays, the name of the dog, where you keep the spare keys. Everything a stranger would need to impersonate you without shattering the lives of those you left behind. My own guide was pathetically short. The studio is your home. The sculpture is your work. Water the plants. The password is Echo. The comm buzzed again, more urgently this time. A red light blinked on its surface. This wasn't a broadcast. This was it. The assignment. My hand froze mid-swing. The mallet hung in the air, a pendulum marking a moment of dreadful silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Everyone knew this feeling, the gut-wrenching lurch of the unknown. Would I be a fisherman in coastal Japan? A doctor in a bustling Nigerian metropolis? A librarian in a quiet English town? I closed my eyes and prayed for a simple life, a quiet life. A life where I could find a block of wood and a carving knife, just to keep my hands from forgetting their purpose. With a trembling finger, I tapped the screen. The data streamed in, a cascade of sterile information. Recipient designate, Arthur Vance. Age, 48. Location, Ethelred Tower, Sector 7, Geneva. Occupation, Senior Vice President, Strategic Acquisitions, Ethelred Corporation. Marital status, married. Isla Vance. Dependents, 1. Leo Vance, age 9. A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than any block of marble, settled over me. Geneva. Ethelred Corporation. Senior Vice President. My mind, so used to thinking in curves and textures, recoiled from the sharp, angular words. Strategic acquisitions. It sounded like a disease. I was being sent into the belly of the beast, the heart of the gleaming, sterile, corporate world I had spent my entire life avoiding. I was to become a man named Arthur Vance. A husband. A father. My gaze fell upon Echo. The figure's hollow chest seemed to mirror the sudden, cavernous emptiness inside me. A father. How could I be a father to a child who was not my own? How could I feign love for a woman I'd never met? My life was one of chosen solitude, of deliberate creation. This new life was a pre-built cage, intricate and terrifying. The sun had dipped below the skyline, and the studio was sinking into a deep, purple twilight. My time was up. I ran my hand over Echo's face, the smooth, featureless plane that was meant to invite the viewer to see themselves. Now it just felt like a premonition of my own impending anonymity. "I'll come back for you," I whispered to the stone. "I promise." The final hour was a blur of frantic activity. I draped a heavy canvas sheet over the sculpture, a shroud to protect it from the dust and the eyes of my replacement. I cleaned my tools, laying them out in their leather roll with a reverence usually reserved for sacred rites. This was my identity, and I was packing it away. At 11:59, I stood in the center of my loft. The place was clean, impersonal, ready for its new inhabitant. My heart pounded a slow, funereal drum. The wristcom began to glow with a soft, white light. A low hum filled the room. I closed my eyes, my last sight the shrouded form of my unfinished masterpiece. I thought of the feel of clay, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the specific weight of my favorite hammer. I tried to burn these sensations into my memory, a final act of defiance. The hum intensified, a feeling like falling and rising at once, a dizzying vertigo of the soul. My consciousness frayed at the edges, dissolving into a stream of pure data. The last thought that was truly mine, truly Elian's, was a desperate, silent scream. Then nothing, and then everything. The acrid smell of ozone and expensive air freshener. The feeling of starched cotton against my skin. The low, thrumming hum of a city that never slept, filtering through triple-glazed windows. I opened my eyes. I was standing in a room that was a symphony of chrome, glass, and minimalist white furniture. I looked down at my hands. They were not my hands. They were larger, the skin smoother, the nails impeccably manicured. A heavy gold watch was strapped to the wrist. I was wearing a tailored black suit. A silk tie knotted so tightly it felt like a noose. My reflection stared back at me from a pane of smoked glass. A man I didn't know, older, with sharp, severe features, a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, and tired, gray eyes that held the weight of 1,000 board meetings. Arthur Vance. A soft click came from behind me. A door opened. A woman's voice, gentle but strained, cut through the silence. "Arthur, are you coming to bed? It's late." I turned, my borrowed heart seizing in my chest. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair and eyes the color of old whiskey. She wore a silk robe, her expression a mixture of fatigue and something else, something I couldn't read. This was Isla, my wife. Elian the sculptor, who had not shared a bed with another person in 5 years, was expected to climb into bed with this stranger and pretend it was the most natural thing in the world. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? She tilted her head, a small frown creasing her brow. "Arthur, are you all right? You look as if you've just seen a ghost." How could I tell her that I was the ghost? A ghost in her home, a ghost in her husband's body, a ghost haunting a life that was not my own. And as I stood there, mute and petrified, I saw the flicker of suspicion in her eyes, a tiny seed of doubt that, if it grew, could bring this entire fragile charade crashing down around me. What does a man do when his first word could be his last? The silence in the master bedroom stretched thin, a fragile membrane threatening to tear. Isla's question hung in the chilled, sterile air between us. Are you all right? It was a simple question, yet held the power to detonate my new reality. My mind, a frantic librarian, scrambled through a million possible responses. The truth was impossible. A lie had to be perfect. I dredged up the persona from the data file. Arthur Vance, 48, confident, authoritative, tired. I forced my foreign lips in what I hoped was a weary smile. Just a long day, I managed, the voice that emerged deeper and more resonant than my own. It felt like ventriloquism. The final quarter reports. You know how it is. The suspicion in her eyes didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by a familiar resignation. I know, she said, her tone softening. She turned and walked back toward the enormous bed, a vast, white desert of high-thread count sheets. Try not to bring them to bed with you this time. It wasn't a joke. It was a plea. I had been Arthur Vance for less than 5 minutes, and I was already discovering the hairline fractures in his perfect life. I followed her, my steps feeling clumsy and uncertain in the expensive leather shoes. The room was less a bedroom and more a showroom. Everything was recessed, integrated, seamless. There were no photographs on the nightstands, no clutter, no sign of the messy, chaotic business of living. It was the architectural equivalent of a poker face. As I undressed, I consulted a frantic mental checklist. Arthur's continuity guide, which I had absorbed in a data burst during the transfer, had been meticulously detailed. Pajamas in the second drawer of the right-hand dresser. Dental hygiene kit in the top left drawer of the in-suite vanity. Prefers the left side of the bed. Sleeps on his back. Does not snore. The level of detail was suffocating. This man had cataloged his own existence, as if preparing for an audit. The in-suite bathroom was a temple of marble and steel. I stared at Arthur's face in the mirror. The gray eyes looked haunted. Was this how he always looked, or was it me, alien, peering out from behind them? The guide had said nothing of the soul-deep exhaustion etched around his eyes. The architects of the reciprocity promised empathy, but they delivered a terrifying form of identity theft. You didn't just walk in another's shoes. You stole their face, their voice, their very presence. I followed the instructions, brushing teeth that felt too large in a mouth that wasn't mine. I found the pajamas, gray silk, cold against my skin. When I finally slipped into bed, I kept a careful, calculated distance from Isla. She was already turned away from me, her breathing slow and even. Asleep? Or pretending? The chasm between us felt 1,000 miles wide. Sleep did not come. My mind, accustomed to the quiet solitude of my loft, was overstimulated. The low hum of the building's climate control, the distant wail of a siren slicing through the Geneva night, the sheer alien presence of another person breathing beside me. It was a cacophony. I lay perfectly still, a statue in a bed, performing the role of Arthur Vance, sleeping. Well, my own life. Who was sleeping in my bed in my loft? The guide had included a brief, anonymized profile of my successor. Designate 7B4L9. Female. Age 32. Occupation. Agroanalyst, Sector 12. An agroanalyst. Would she appreciate the quality of the northern light in the morning? Would she understand the sacred silence of the studio? Would she touch my sculpture? The thought sent a jolt of panic through me. I had shrouded it, but the canvas was just a thin veil. The rules of the reciprocity were strict. You will not, under any circumstances, attempt to contact or research your original life or your designated successor. To do so is to risk permanent erasure. Permanent erasure, not death. Something worse. To be wiped from the system, your consciousness deleted, your body left a hollow shell. The sun rose, not with the gentle grace I knew, but as an aggressive, clinical light filtering through automated blinds that retracted at precisely 6 a.m. A soft, melodic chime filled the room. Arthur's alarm. The morning was a tightly choreographed ballet of routine. Isla was already up, a silent wraith in the kitchen. My first test was coffee. Arthur's Guide. Espresso. Double shot. No sugar, no milk. From the Jura machine. I found a machine, a gleaming silver behemoth that looked more complex than my first kiln. I managed to produce something that looked and smelled like espresso. The taste was bitter, acidic, an assault on my senses. I drank it without flinching, another small performance. Then he appeared, a small boy with a storm of dark, curly hair and Arthur's serious eyes, clutching a worn stuffed bear. Leo, my son, my 9-year-old stranger. Morning, Dad. He mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. My throat closed up. Dad. The word struck me with physical force. I was an artist. I created things from stone and clay, inanimate objects I could control. This was a living, breathing being looking at me with expectation, with a history I couldn't access. Morning, Leo, I replied, my voice catching slightly. I cleared my throat. Big day at school. I ventured, paraphrasing a generic line from the guide. He shrugged, pouring cereal into a bowl with practiced ease. It's Project A. We're building bridges out of spaghetti. Spaghetti bridges. The sculptor in me stirred. I could almost feel the brittle snap of the pasta, the challenge of creating a strong truss, the satisfaction of a well-distributed load. For a fleeting second, I wasn't Arthur Vance, the corporate shark. I was Elian, the artist, and I want to talk to this boy about structure and form. You have to use triangles, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Triangles are the strongest shape. They distribute the weight evenly. Leo looked up from his cereal, his spoon hovering. A flicker of genuine interest lit up his eyes. Really? Mrs. Davison just said to use a lot of glue. Isla, who had been observing the exchange from the counter, turned to me. The guarded expression on her face had softened, replaced by one of pure surprise. Arthur, she said, and my name in her mouth sounded different this time. I didn't know you knew anything about building bridges. I froze. A mistake. A critical error. Arthur Vance, according to his own meticulous guide, had no hobbies. His interests were limited to market trends and corporate mergers. He wouldn't know about the structural integrity of triangles. I read it somewhere, I stammered, backpedaling furiously. An article on structural efficiency in emerging markets. The corporate jargon felt like a shield. The light in Leo's eyes dimmed. Isla's face shuddered again. The moment of connection was gone, erased by my clumsy save. I had offered the boy a piece of myself, of Elian, and had been forced to snatch it back, reinforcing the cold, distant persona of the father he knew. The weight of this deception was heavier than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about remembering passwords and coffee orders. It was about the constant, exhausting vigilance against your own soul. Later, as I was putting on my suit jacket, preparing to descend into the corporate battlefield, I noticed my wrist comm was blinking with a private notification. It was from a central mandate authority, a welcome packet of sorts. I opened it. It contained maps to Ethelred Tower, security credentials, and a final, encrypted file. This was Arthur's complete continuity guide, the unabridged version for his own reference. I scrolled through the dense data, financial portfolios, medical history, corporate hierarchy charts. It was a digital blueprint of a man's life. I was about to close it when my finger brushed against a subfolder at the very bottom, labeled simply Contingencies. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single password-protected text file named If. My artist's intuition, the part of me that always sensed something hidden beneath the surface, screamed. This wasn't standard. The guides were supposed to be straightforward manuals, not treasure maps with cryptic clues. I tried the obvious passwords. Isla, Leo, Ethelred, success. All denied. I thought back to the man's meticulous, almost paranoid planning. The password wouldn't be emotional. It would be logical, personal, yet obscure. What to find this man? His work, his acquisitions. But what if there was something else? My eyes scanned the sterile room, searching for a clue, any hint of the real Arthur Vance beyond the corporate shell. My gaze landed on the nightstand. There was nothing on it but I remembered the guide mentioning something he did every night before sleep. Final action before lights out. Check stock ticker for Nikkei index. It was an obsession. On a hunch, I typed in the stock symbol, N225. Access granted. The text file opened. It contained a single, chilling sentence. They know more than they let on. Don't trust the guide. Don't trust anyone. The key is in the echo. My blood ran cold. The key is in the echo. My sculpture. My echo. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be. The mandate's algorithm was random. There was no way it could know about my art. But the word pulsed on the screen, a beacon of terrifying significance. Echo. What did Arthur Vance, a corporate executive in Geneva, know about my sculpture in a dusty loft halfway across the world? And who were they? The corporation? The government? The very architects of the reciprocity itself? The message shattered the foundation of this world, suggesting that the random, empathetic system I had been taught to accept was something else entirely. Something with secrets. The message ended with a string of numbers. Not a code. Coordinates. And they weren't for a place in Geneva. They pointed to a remote, abandoned quarry, miles outside the city limits. Was this a trap left by a paranoid man? Or was it the first thread of a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone could imagine? And what, in God's name, did it have to do with my unfinished statue? The words on the screen burned into my retinas. The key is in the echo. My sculpture. My soul rendered in stone. It felt like a violation, as if this stranger, Arthur Vance, had reached through the void and touched the most sacred part of my identity. Coincidence was a comforting lie, but my gut, the same intuition that guided my chisel, told me this was something more. This was a deliberate, impossible connection. For a week, I lived a life of meticulous imitation. I was a phantom puppeteering a flesh and blood man. I woke at 6 a.m. I drank the bitter espresso. I sat in a chauffeured electric vehicle that whispered through the pristine streets of Geneva, a city that felt less like a home and more like an architect's rendering. Ethelred Tower was a shard of glass and steel that speared the sky, a monument to a god I didn't believe in, prophet. My, Arthur's, office was on the 82nd floor. It had one wall made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, the lake, and the distant, jagged peaks of the Alps. It was a conqueror's view, but it felt like a cage. I would stand there, looking at the mountains, those raw, magnificent sculptures carved by nature, and feel a profound, aching homesickness for the simple dust and grit of my studio. My days were a blur of meetings filled with a language I barely understood. Synergistic leverage, Q3 deliverable restructuring, hostile takeover viability. I was an artist adrift in a sea of acronyms. But I discovered something surprising. My old skills were not entirely useless. My ability to read the subtle shifts in a person's posture, the tension in their jaw, the slight hesitation before they spoke, the same skills I used to find the life in a block of stone, allowed me to navigate the treacherous currents of the boardroom. I could sense deception, ambition, and fear in the men and women around me. I said little, cultivating an aura of enigmatic authority, which, I soon realized, everyone simply interpreted as Arthur's usual ruthless brilliance. The ghost in this corporate machine was me, Elian. My inner world was a constant, dissonant counterpoint to my outward reality. While my hands signed multi-million franc contracts, my mind was tracing the curve of Echo's spine. While my ears processed market analytics, my soul was listening for the tap-scrape of a chisel that wasn't there. My greatest fear was not of being discovered. It was of forgetting. I was terrified that 365 days of this sterile, high-pressure existence would sand down the edges of my soul, that my hands would forget the feel of stone, that the artist, Elian, would be completely subsumed by the executive, Arthur. Every night, after Isla and Leo were asleep, I would go into the cold, silent bathroom. I would close my eyes, and in the dark I would sculpt. I would move my hands through the air, carving an invisible block of marble, desperately rehearsing the motions, trying to keep the muscle memory alive. They were frantic, silent ballets of creation, a desperate attempt to hold onto the man I was. This fear of erasure was my constant companion. It sat with me in meetings. It lay beside me in the cold, empty space in Arthur's bed. It watched me from Arthur's tired eyes in the mirror. Who are we, if not the sum of our passions, our creations? If you strip a man of his art, his work, his love, what is left? Just a vessel, a container for a life. The reciprocity was supposed to teach empathy, but I feared it was teaching me how to be hollow. My relationship with my borrowed family was a complex, painful dance. Leo, my son, was a beacon of unfiltered reality in this world of artifice. His questions were guileless. His laughter was real. That moment with the spaghetti bridges had been a mistake, but it had also been a spark. I found myself looking for ways to connect with him that wouldn't betray my cover. I learned Arthur's guide mentioned he read business journals to Leo at night, a horrifyingly sterile form of bedtime story. One night, I put the journal aside. "Let me tell you a different story," I said, my voice soft. Leo looked at me, surprised. "Is it about synergistic leverage?" A sad laugh escaped me. "No, it's about a man who could see statues inside rocks and had to let them out." I told him a story, a fairy tale about a sculptor. I spoke of the patience of stone, the song of the chisel, the magic of bringing something beautiful from a rough, unyielding block. I poured all my longing, all my passion for my own life into that story. Leo listened, wrapped his serious eyes wide with wonder. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Dad," he said finally, his voice small, "I didn't know you liked stories like that." "There's a lot you don't know," I said, the words a double-edged truth. As I tucked him in, his small hand clasped mine for a moment. The warmth, the simple trust in that gesture, it was overwhelming. It was a feeling I, Elian, had never known. A dangerous, beautiful feeling that threatened to root me in this borrowed life. My interactions with Isla were far more fraught. She was a planet with a gravitational pull I desperately tried to resist, yet was constantly caught in. She moved through the vast, empty apartment with a quiet, melancholic grace. We spoke in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a long-married couple who have run out of things to say. But sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a strange, searching expression. It happened when I absent-mindedly hummed a tune Arthur wouldn't know, or when I paused to watch the way the light hit a crystal vase on the mantelpiece. In those moments, I felt like a poorly rendered forgery. One evening, I found her in the living room. The lights were dim, and the city lights of Geneva glittered like fallen stars outside the panoramic window. A sound I didn't recognize filled the air, a low, mournful, and incredibly complex piece of music. It was a cello suite. "What is this?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She started, as if my presence had broken a spell. "It's Bach," she said, not looking at me. "Cello Suite No. 1. You hate it." The accusation in her tone was subtle, but sharp. "You hate it." Another test. Another landmine. "People can change," I said carefully. She finally turned to look at me, and her whiskey-colored eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They can't. Not really." The conversation was over, but the weight of it remained. Arthur hated this beautiful, soulful music. What kind of man hated Bach? It was another crack in the facade, another glimpse of the cold, unyielding man whose life I now inhabited. The man who was planning to abandon this sad, lonely woman. The secret message from the contingencies file gnawed at me. The key is in the echo and the coordinates. I spent hours at night, after my invisible sculpting, poring over satellite maps of the quarry. It was a massive, gouged-out wound in the earth, long since abandoned. What could possibly be there? And the risk of going was immense. My movements were tracked, as were everyone's. An unscheduled, unexplained trip to a remote location would raise flags with the mandate authority. I needed a reason, an excuse. My chance came during a grueling board meeting. We were discussing the acquisition of a smaller tech firm, and one of the board members, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Thorne who watched me with unnerving intensity, brought up the issue of raw material sourcing for their hardware division. We need to diversify our mineral suppliers, Marcus said, his eyes fixed on me. Our reliance on the Eastern conglomerate is a strategic vulnerability. An idea, risky and audacious, sparked in my mind. It was a gamble, a bluff of epic proportions. You're right, Marcus, I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the frantic improvisation happening in my head. In fact, I've been looking into alternative local sources. There's an old quarry about 40 kilometers from here. It's been defunct for decades, but geological surveys from the period suggest significant deposits of quartz and other silicates. It might be worth a preliminary, off-the-books survey. The boardroom fell silent. I had taken their corporate jargon and woven a lie around the coordinates. I was using their language, their logic, to serve my own secret purpose. Marcus looked impressed, a flicker of respect in his predatory gaze. Ahead of the game, as always, Arthur. An excellent initiative. I had my cover. The trip was approved, logged as preliminary resource scouting. I would have a 4-hour window. The night before the trip, I lay awake, my mind racing. I felt like a character in one of my own bedtime stories for Leo, a man venturing into a dark forest in search of a hidden truth. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, there was something else, a flicker of excitement. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving. I was acting. I was Elian again, the seeker, the one who looks beneath the surface. I glanced over at Isla. She was asleep, her face relaxed in a way I rarely saw when she was awake. In the dim light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. I felt a pang of something, pity, responsibility, a strange, unearned affection. I was using her husband's resources, his power, his reputation, to chase a ghost that was connected to my own life. It felt like a betrayal, even though Arthur himself had planned a far greater one. The whole system, the reciprocity, was built on a foundation of necessary betrayals. But Arthur's secret message suggested something more sinister. A system within the system, a lie beneath the benevolent surface of the global law. As the first hints of dawn touched the sky, I knew I had to go. I had to know what was in that quarry. I had to know how a man I'd never met knew the name of my most personal creation. The question was no longer just about surviving the year. It was about understanding the true nature of the world I had been thrust into. And I had a chilling premonition that the answer I was looking for wasn't just about Arthur Vance or Elian the sculptor. It was about everyone. Was the empathy machine a lie? And if so, what was its true purpose? The drive to the quarry was an exercise in controlled paranoia. The corporate car, a silent electric sedan, piloted itself along the immaculate Swiss motorway. I sat in the back, ostensibly reviewing geological data on a tablet, but my senses were on high alert. Every passing car, every surveillance drone hovering like a metallic insect over the highway, felt like an eye watching me. Arthur's message, "Don't trust anyone," had become my mantra. The cityscape of Geneva, with its polished perfection, gave way to rolling green hills and then to a more rugged, untamed landscape. The car turned off the main road, following a narrow, cracked asphalt path that was slowly being reclaimed by nature. Weeds grew through the fissures, a testament to time's quiet victory over human endeavor. It reminded me of my studio, of the beauty in imperfection and decay, a concept that had no place in Arthur Vance's world. The car came to a stop at a rusted chain-link fence. A faded sign, pockmarked with age, read, Cour de Saint Victor, Axe Interdit. The driver, a stoic man whose name I didn't know, turned to me. "This is as far as the vehicle can go, Mr. Vance. The terrain is unstable." "I know," I said, projecting a confidence I didn't feel. "Wait for me here. I won't be more than a couple of hours." Stepping out of the air-conditioned car was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and the clean, mineral smell of stone. It was the smell of my own life. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of myself return. I found a gap in the fence and slipped through. The quarry was a vast, silent amphitheater of gray rock. Decades of rain had filled the bottom, creating a lake of unnaturally turquoise water. The sheer cliffs were scarred with the marks of old machinery, geometric lines and cuts that stood in stark contrast to the organic chaos of the encroaching forest. It was a place of violent creation, now left to a slow, quiet peace. The coordinates from Arthur's file led me not down into the basin, but along the high rim of the quarry. The path was treacherous, littered with loose scree. I was wearing 2,000-franc Italian leather shoes, utterly unsuited for the task. I felt a bitter, ironic laugh bubble up inside me. Elian the artist, who spent his days in sturdy, dust-caked boots, was going to break his neck in a rich man's shoes. After 20 minutes of careful scrambling, I arrived at the spot. It was unremarkable, just a flat ledge overlooking the turquoise water. There was no X marking the spot, no hidden lever. Just rock, wind, and silence. My heart sank. Had been a wild goose chase? A paranoid delusion of a dying man? I stood there, feeling foolish. The wind whipped around me, carrying the faint, mournful cry of a distant bird. The key is in the echo. The phrase looped in my mind. Echo. What was an echo in a place like this? A sound bouncing off the quarry walls. I looked across the chasm. The rock face opposite was a mirror of the one I stood on. An echo. On an impulse, I shouted. Hello. My voice, Arthur's voice, boomed across the quarry. The sound hit the far wall and came back, distorted and faint. Fellow, ello, lo. It was a child's game, and I felt ridiculous. But then, as the sound faded, I noticed something. The echo wasn't perfect. There was a slight flutter, a dissonance in the returning sound, as if it were passing over an object. I scanned the opposite cliff face, my artist's eye searching for any irregularity in the pattern. The rock was a tapestry of gray and ochre, crisscrossed with fissures and ledges. But there, about halfway up, was something that didn't belong. A patch of rock that was just a shade too uniform, a rectangle of gray that seemed too perfect in its geometry. It was camouflaged, brilliantly so, but to a man who had spent his life studying stone, it was as obvious as a painted door. There was no way to get to it from here. I had to circle the entire quarry, a journey that would take at least an hour. The clock was ticking. My 4-hour window was shrinking. The trek was grueling. I slipped and slid, my hands getting scraped raw on the sharp rocks. The pristine suit was snagged and dirted. By the time I reached the other side, I was sweating, disheveled, and my heart was pounding with a mixture of exertion and anticipation. I found the spot. It was a metal plate, about a meter square, textured and painted to look exactly like the surrounding rock. There was no handle, no lock. But in the bottom right corner, there was a small, almost invisible indentation. I pressed it. With a low hydraulic hiss, a section of the rock face swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A tunnel. My breath caught. This was real. I took out my phone, Arthur's phone, and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing smooth, man-made walls. It was a short corridor leading to a small, hermetically sealed chamber, no larger than a closet. Inside, the air was cold and stale. There was a single metal shelf, and on that shelf was a small, hardened steel lockbox. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was heavy, solid. There was no keyhole, only a biometric fingerprint scanner. Of course, Arthur Vance, a man who trusted no one, would use the one key no one could steal, his own body. I pressed the thumb of my borrowed hand against the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a green light blinked, and with a soft click, the box opened. I expected documents, money, a weapon, but it was none of those things. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single object, a data slate, thin as a sheet of glass, and a small, intricately carved bird made of what looked like dark, polished serpentine. I picked up the stone bird. It was smooth, cool to the touch. The craftsmanship was exquisite. The lines were fluid, elegant, capturing the essence of a swift in flight. It was an artist's work. It was something I would have made. My mind reeled. What was this? Why would a man like Arthur Vance hide something like this? I put the bird in my pocket and powered on the data slate. It wasn't encrypted. It lit up with a single folder on the screen. The folder was labeled Sanctuary. I opened it. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. It was a list of names. Hundreds of them. Each name was paired with another, along with a string of data, biometrics, psychological profiles, and a date. My eyes scanned the list, and then I saw it. Vance Arthur, Elian, Rousseau. Assignment date, October 27th. My name, my full name, staring back at me from a secret data slate in a hidden bunker. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. My assignment to Arthur Vance had been arranged. The entire lottery, the bedrock of our society, was a lie. My mind struggled to process the implications. The reciprocity wasn't an impartial algorithm for empathy. It was a system being manipulated. But by whom? And for what purpose? I scrolled frantically through the rest of the file. It was a manifesto. It described a secret network of individuals who had discovered the back doors in the reciprocity system. They called themselves the cartographers of self. They had found a way to influence the assignments, to pair specific people for specific reasons. Some pairings were punishments, sending a dissident to a nightmarish life. Some were experiments, and some, the file explained, were for extraction. The Sanctuary Project was an escape plan, a way to break the loop. The file detailed a protocol to trigger a cascade failure in the transfer signal at the precise moment of the next reciprocity, effectively severing the connection and leaving the two exchange consciousnesses permanently in their host bodies. It was a way to start a new life and never have to return. It was a one-way ticket to a new identity. Arthur Vance wasn't just a corporate shark. He was part of a secret rebellion. He was planning to use this technology to permanently stay in someone else's body, or to help someone else do so. But why my body? What was so special about a reclusive artist? Then I saw the notes at the bottom of the file. A plan. Arthur was supposed to be paired with a neuroscientist, not me. The plan was to use the scientist's knowledge to perfect the Sanctuary Protocol. But there had been a last-minute change. A subversion. Someone had altered Arthur's pairing. My name was there, but it looked forced, spliced in. Someone had hijacked Arthur's hijacking. I stumbled out of the chamber, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The world had just been turned upside down. The benevolent system was a sham, and the resistance against it had been compromised. I was not a random participant. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, moved by a hidden hand. I sealed the chamber, pocketed the lockbox, and scrambled back towards the car, my mind racing. Who changed the assignment? Why me? And what did it have to do with my sculpture? The key is in the echo. The phrase now felt less like a clue and more like a taunt. When I got back to the car, the driver gave my disheveled appearance a curious look, but said nothing. The ride back to Geneva was a silent torment. I had to pretend to be Arthur Vance, a man who had just scouted a quarry, while my entire understanding of reality had been shattered. That evening, the atmosphere in the apartment was thick with an unspoken tension. Isla was even quieter than usual. Leo seemed subdued. I tried to engage him, asking about his spaghetti bridge, but he just gave me a one-word answer and retreated to his room. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, wrestling with the terrifying knowledge I now possessed, Isla spoke from the doorway of the walk-in closet. "You smell of dirt," she said. It wasn't an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "And your suit is torn." The quarry was more rugged than I expected, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning my face with that unnerving intensity. "You were gone a long time, Arthur. You missed your call with the Tokyo office." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I had forgotten. In the chaos of the discovery, a scheduled call, something the Real Arthur would never miss, had slipped my mind. It was a major mistake. "It can be rescheduled," I said dismissively, trying to channel Arthur's arrogance. "He called here, looking for you," Isla continued, her voice low and steady. "Marcus Thorne." He sounded concerned. "He said you've been acting erratically for weeks. He said he's worried about your stability, about your fitness to lead." The walls were closing in. The corporate world I had bluffed my way through was turning on me. Marcus was hunting, but it was Isla's next words that truly froze me. She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more powerful than any shout. "At night," she said, "sometimes in your sleep, you move your hands, like you're shaping something, something that isn't there. She held my gaze, her whiskey-colored eyes filled with a century of questions. Arthur has never been a dreamer, she said. So tell me, who are you? The question hung in the air, sharp and lethal as a shard of glass. Who are you? It was the question I'd been running from for months, the one I screamed into the silence of my own mind every night. And now it was being asked by the one person I could not lie to convincingly not anymore. My carefully constructed facade, the persona of Arthur Vance, crumbled into dust. The arrogance, the confidence, the corporate jargon, all of it deserted me. I was left standing there, exposed, a sculptor in a suit, a ghost in a machine that had just been called out. I started, but the words died in my throat. My mind was a maelstrom. The sanctuary file, the secret pairing, the impossible knowledge of my sculpture, and now this, a direct confrontation. Isla didn't wait for an answer. She took a step back, a gesture not of fear, but of confirmation. A single, crystalline tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent testament to weeks, perhaps months, of suspicion solidifying into a terrible certainty. I knew it, she whispered, her voice breaking. I knew it the first morning when you spoke to Leo about the bridge. There was a light in your eyes, a passion. Arthur lost that light years ago. She let out a choked, bitter laugh. I thought I was going insane, or maybe that he was finally changing. But it wasn't change. It was replacement. The dam of my deception broke. There was no point in lying anymore. The exhaustion of the performance was too great. My name is Elian, I said, the words feeling strange and foreign in Arthur's voice. I'm a sculptor. She closed her eyes, absorbing the truth. There was no theatrical gasp, no scream of terror, just a profound, heartbreaking stillness. When she opened them again, the sadness was still there, but it was mingled with something new, a sliver of relief. A sculptor, she repeated softly, as if testing the word on her tongue. That explains the hands. In your sleep. We stood in the sterile perfection of Arthur's bedroom, two strangers bound by an impossible secret. The rules of reciprocity were absolute. Revealing your true identity was the ultimate taboo, punishable by erasure. We had just crossed a line from which there was no return. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely audible. The power in this situation was entirely hers. One word from her to the Mandate Authority, and I would cease to exist. Isla walked over to the vast window and looked out at the glittering expanse of Geneva. What am I going to do? She mused, her reflection a faint ghost against the night sky. For the first time in 10 years, I have no idea, and it's the most liberating feeling in the world. She turned back to me, her gaze clear and direct. The man whose body you are occupying, he was not a good husband. He was a brilliant businessman, a provider, a pillar of society. But he was a hollow man, Elian. A gilded cage is still a cage. He was cold, calculating, and the life we built together was a transaction. And for the last few weeks, she added, her voice dropping, he was planning on liquidating his assets. My blood ran cold. He was planning to leave you. Worse, she corrected. He was planning to leave with Leo. The lockbox, the files, the sanctuary project. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Arthur wasn't just escaping the reciprocity. He was escaping his life, his marriage. And he was going to take the son he barely spoke to, leaving Isla with nothing. The cruelty of it was staggering. The sanctuary project, I said, the name of the file tasting like poison. Isla's eyes widened in shock. How do you know about that? I told her everything. The message in the contingencies file, the quarry, the hidden chamber, the lockbox, the data slate that proved our pairing was no accident. As I spoke, her expression shifted from sadness to a slow-burning anger. She wasn't angry at me. She was angry at the man she had married, at the system that had enabled his deceit. The cartographers of self, she murmured, an old memory surfacing. Arthur mentioned them once, years ago. He dismissed them as a myth, a conspiracy theory for anti-reciprocity radicals. He was one of them. All this time, he was one of them. We talked for hours, the secrets pouring out of us. I told her about my life, my studio, my unfinished sculpture, Echo. I described the feel of stone, the smell of dust, the quiet joy of creation. For the first time, I was able to be myself, to speak my own truth, even if it was through another man's mouth. In return, she painted a portrait of her life with Arthur. A life of opulent emptiness, of public smiles and private silences. She had been a musician once, a promising cellist. The beautiful Bach suite I'd heard wasn't just music he hated. It was the music she had given up to be his wife. He had systematically dismantled her passions, viewing them as distractions from her primary role, supporting his career. He didn't just build a cage for me, she said, her voice trembling with a decade of suppressed rage. He convinced me to build it myself, to lock the door and throw away the key. The revelation of Arthur's escape plan, and the fact that he was willing to steal her son, had shattered the last vestiges of her loyalty. In a strange, tragic way, my arrival, the arrival of a stranger, had set her free. But our shared confession came with a terrible price. We were now co-conspirators in a world that did not tolerate them. And Marcus Thorne was circling. Marcus is a shark who smells blood in the water, Isla said, her mind, sharpened by years of navigating corporate politics by proxy, clicking into gear. He's always wanted Arthur's position. Your erratic behavior is the opportunity he's been waiting for. If he forces a fitness review with the board and the mandate authority, they'll do a deep psychological and biometric scan. They will find you, Elian. They will discover the anomaly. We were trapped. If I was discovered, I would be erased. Isla would be implicated as an accomplice. And Leo would lose the only father he had, even if he was a forgery, and be left in the care of a system that had no room for such messy complications. There's more, I said, my mind racing back to the data slate. Someone changed the plan. Arthur was supposed to be paired with a scientist. Someone hijacked the cartographer's network and put me in his place. But why? The key is in the echo. The phrase echoed in my own mind. I took the small, serpentine bird from my pocket. This was in a lockbox, too. Isla took it, her fingers tracing its elegant lines. It's beautiful. The craftsmanship is perfect. Her eyes met mine. Who would carve something like this and leave it in a lockbox with revolutionary data? An artist. The thought struck us both at the same time. What if, I began, the theory forming even as I spoke it, the person who hijacked the pairing wasn't an enemy of Arthur? What if they were an enemy of the cartographer's plan? Someone who didn't want him to escape? Or someone who wanted to send a message, Isla added, looking at the bird. A message to the person who would find this box. A message to you. The layers of deception were dizzying. A secret society manipulating the global system. A man within that society planning his own selfish betrayal. And a third, unknown player subverting the whole scheme and deliberately sending me, a sculptor, into the heart of the conspiracy. Echo, I whispered. It has to be about my sculpture. But how? No one has seen it. No one even knows its name, except me. Is that true? Isla asked gently. No one at all? I thought back. My life was solitary, but not entirely. I had a mentor, an old professor named Julian, who I hadn't spoken to in years. I had a gallery dealer who I corresponded with via email. And then there was Oignon. The name surfaced from a deep, forgotten part of my memory. Oignon, a woman I had met briefly months before the reciprocity. She was a journalist, doing a story on artisans in the digital age. She had visited my studio. I had been guarded, reluctant to share my work. But she had been different. She hadn't just looked at my pieces. She had asked what they meant. She had asked about my philosophy, my process. We had a conversation that lasted for hours, a rare spark of intellectual connection in my isolated world. I had told her about my magnum opus. I had told her its name, Echo, and then I remembered something else. Something she had said as she was leaving. She had been looking at a small, early piece of mine, a carving of a bird. I had a friend who used to carve, she had said, a sad smile on her face. He was brilliant, but he gave it up, said the world had no more room for that kind of beauty. My successor, the one who is now living in my studio. The anonymous profile designates 7B4L9. Female, age 32. Occupation, agroanalyst. Wait, the mandate only gives you the occupation, not the name. Anya was a journalist. Could the profile be a lie? A blind? Was it possible? Could Anya, the journalist, be the one in my studio? Could she be the one who hijacked the system, using her knowledge of my life, of Echo, to send me here? If so, she wasn't just a journalist. She was a cartographer, or something more. The pieces were beginning to form a terrifying, unbelievable picture. This wasn't just about Arthur's escape. This was about my art. My sculpture was somehow the key, the fulcrum of this entire conspiracy. A new resolve hardened within me. My goal was no longer just to survive. It was to understand, to uncover the truth that this unknown player, this Anya, had sent me here to find. Marcus Thorne is the immediate threat, I said, my voice now firm, clear. The artist's focus had returned, not for stone, but for strategy. We can't run. We can't hide. So we have to dismantle him. From the inside. Isla looked at me, a flicker of Arthur's ruthless determination now glinting in my borrowed eyes. How, she asked. He has the board's ear. He's building a case against you. Arthur Vance was a predator, I said, the words coming with a chilling ease. And predators always leave a trail. He was involved in shady dealings, I'm sure of it. He was arrogant enough to think he could never be caught. His continuity guide is a manual on how to be him, but his computer, his private files, that's a manual on how to destroy him. And by extension, how to destroy Marcus, who is likely his accomplice or his rival. This was my new sculpture. It wasn't made of stone, but of data, lies, and corporate intrigue. The goal was not to create beauty, but to carve out a space for survival, for truth. I had to become Arthur Vance in a way I never intended. Not just to imitate him, but to use his own dark tools against the world he built. I had to tear it all down to protect the woman he had betrayed and the son he had tried to steal. But even as this new, cold purpose settled in me, a deeper, more profound question loomed. If I succeeded, if I survived this year and returned to my own body, what would I find? What was Anya, the mysterious cartographer, doing in my studio? Was she protecting my sculpture, or was she waiting to destroy it? The next few weeks were a descent into the belly of the beast. With Isla as my guide and co-conspirator, I stopped being Elian playing the part of Arthur. I became a method actor living the role. We were a strange, secret team, united by the shared threat of annihilation. During the day, I was the ruthless senior vice president, and at night, we were two detectives poring over the digital ghost of the real Arthur Vance. His private servers were a fortress, but Isla knew the architecture of his mind. He was arrogant, she'd said, but also sentimental in a clinical way. The master password wasn't a word or a number, but the exact date and time, down to the second, of Ethelred Corporation's first IPO. It was the birth of his true love. Inside was a labyrinth of darkness. Illicit deals, shell corporations, back-channel communications. Arthur Vance hadn't just been a predator. He had been an apex predator. He had dirt on everyone, including the members of his own board. And most importantly, he had a secret file on Marcus Thorne. Marcus hadn't just been Arthur's rival. He had been his cleaner. For years, Arthur had orchestrated ethically and legally dubious acquisitions, and Marcus had been the one to bury the bodies, falsifying reports, intimidating smaller company owners, creating the plausible deniability that kept Arthur's hands pristine. The file was Arthur's insurance policy, a loaded gun pointed at his supposed subordinate's head. And now that gun was in my hand. Armed with this knowledge, my performance at the office changed. The cautious, observant man was gone, replaced by a cold, confident automaton. I preempted Marcus's attacks in meetings, using information from the secret files to subtly demonstrate that I was 10 steps ahead of him. I saw the fear in his eyes, mingled with confusion. How could this erratic, distracted Arthur suddenly be more formidable than ever? He thought he was hunting a wounded animal, only to find it had grown new, sharper teeth. But this immersion came at a cost. The deeper I waded into Arthur's world, the more I felt Elian slipping away. My hands, which once dreamt of shaping stone, now navigated complex financial models. My mind, which once found solace in silence, now thrived on the cut and thrust of corporate warfare. I was good at it, terrifyingly good. The artist's intuition for weakness, for structure, for the hidden form, was a potent weapon in the boardroom. One evening, Isla found me staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the panoramic window. "You look like him," she said softly, standing behind me. I turned. "What?" "Right now," she clarified. "The set of your jaw, the coldness in your eyes. You look just like you used to after a successful, bloody acquisition." Her words were a punch to the gut. I looked at my hands, Arthur's hands, and for a moment I couldn't remember the feeling of clay. The fear of erasure I'd had at the beginning was nothing compared to this. This was erasure by assimilation. I was becoming the man whose life I was inhabiting. "It's just an act," I said, more to convince myself than her. "Be careful, Elian," she warned, her voice laced with concern. "When you wear a mask for too long, it starts to grow to your face." Her words haunted me as the day of the reckoning approached. Marcus, growing desperate, had forced the issue. He had called an emergency meeting with the executive board and a representative for the Mandate Authority's Oversight Committee. The official reason was to discuss leadership stability. The real reason was to put me on trial. The night before the meeting, the tension in the apartment was unbearable. This was it, the endgame. If my gambit failed, we would lose everything. "Leo's asleep," Isla said, entering the study where I was making my final preparations. "I read him your story again, the one about the sculptor." I looked up from the data slate. "Does he still like it?" "He loves it," she said. She walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, real. "He asked me if you could teach him how to carve." "Out of soap," he said. The simple request, the simple faith of a child, cut through the layers of corporate armor I had built around myself. It was a reminder of who I was, of the man Leo had caught a glimpse of. It was a reminder of what was at stake. Not just survival, but the chance for this broken family to have a future, even if I wouldn't be in it. "Win tomorrow, Elian," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. "Not for Arthur's legacy, for Leo's future." The next day, I walked into the 82nd floor boardroom. The air was thick with tension. The board members were arranged around the long, black table, their faces grim. At the head of the table sat Marcus, looking smug and triumphant. And next to him was a woman in the severe gray uniform of the Mandate Authority. Her face was impassive, her eyes missing nothing. "Arthur," Marcus began, dispensing with the usual pleasantries. "We're here because of serious concerns about your recent conduct. Missed calls, erratic decisions, and a general disengagement. The board requires assurance of your fitness to lead." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I sat down. I placed my data slate on the table. "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and low. Every eye in the room was on me. I've been disengaged, preoccupied, but not for the reasons you think. I tapped the screen of the data slate, and the main holographic projector in the center of the table flickered to life. It didn't show financial charts. It showed a single name, Project Nightingale. Marcus's face went white. "I've been conducting a deep audit of our acquisitions over the last 5 years," I continued, my voice cold as ice. "And I found some irregularities. A pattern. Specifically, a pattern of acquiring promising green tech startups, only to strip them of their patents and then bankrupt them, selling the assets to a certain third-party conglomerate at a fraction of their value. A project I believe you privately referred to as Nightingale, because it involved silencing so many beautiful songs." I laid out the evidence, piece by piece. The falsified reports, the money trails leading to offshore accounts, the buried environmental impact studies. I wasn't just exposing Marcus. I was exposing a conspiracy that implicated half the people in the room, all orchestrated by him. I had used Arthur's playbook, but I had changed the target. "Arthur would never," Marcus stammered, his composure shattering. "He was part of this." "Arthur had a change of heart," I said, looking directly at the Mandate Authority representative. "He realized the rot had gone too deep. He was gathering this evidence to clean house. His erratic behavior was the stress of preparing to expose the very people he once trusted. It was a masterful lie, built on a foundation of truth. I was using Arthur's crimes to paint a picture of his redemption, and in doing so, I was destroying Marcus with Arthur's own ammunition. The mandate representative listened, her expression unreadable. The board was in chaos, turning on each other, accusations flying. My work was done. I had set the fire. Now I just had to watch it burn. I returned to the apartment that evening, exhausted but victorious. The immediate threat was neutralized. Marcus and his co-conspirators were being detained by the authority for corporate espionage and violations of the fair market mandates. My position, Arthur's position, was secure. Isla met me at the door. She didn't need to ask. She saw it on my face. She threw her arms around me, a gesture of pure, unadulterated relief. It was not the embrace of a wife to a husband. It was one comrade to another after a battle won. "You did it," she breathed. "We did it," I corrected. That night, for the first time, there was a sense of peace in the vast apartment. We had faced the dragon and won. We had a few months of quiet left until the next reciprocity, a space to breathe. A few days later, a package arrived. It was a standard mandate authority data slate, the kind used for official reports. It was addressed to me, to Arthur Vance. I opened it. It was the full, unredacted report on the Project Nightingale investigation. As I scrolled through the corporate malfeasance, my eyes caught a name on a list of Shell Corporation directors, Anya Sharma. Anya. My heart stopped. Anya, the journalist, was involved in Arthur's and Marcus's dirty dealings? It didn't make sense. Why would she be part of this corruption and also be the one to send me here, seemingly to expose it? I scrolled further, my hands trembling. The report detailed her role. Her Shell Corporation was one of the first victims of Project Nightingale, a small, innovative company focused on sustainable agriculture tech. An agro-analyst's dream had been bought out and gutted by Ethelred. Anya Sharma was listed as the founder. She had been ruined by Arthur Vance. This changed everything. This wasn't a philosophical game. This was revenge. She hadn't sent me here to uncover a grand conspiracy about the reciprocity. She had sent me here for a much more personal reason, to destroy the man who had destroyed her life's work, using his own body as the weapon. My art, Echo, wasn't the key to some global truth. It was just a marker, a way for her to identify me, the person she chose to be her instrument of vengeance. I felt a profound, chilling sense of violation. I had not been a pawn in a grand chess match. I had been a tool, a hammer used to shatter the life of a man, wielded by a woman I barely knew. My struggles, my fears, my assimilation into Arthur's world, my protection of Isla and Leo, it was all just collateral damage in her personal war. The victory I had just won fell hollow, tainted, and then the final, devastating blow. My wrist comm-chimed. It was an alert from the building's security system, a remote access request for the apartment's media hub. It was an override command, something only the highest level of the mandate authority or someone with elite hacking skills could do. Before I could react, the grand screen on the living room wall, usually dark, flickered to life. It wasn't a message. It was a live video feed. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. It was my studio, my home, and standing in the middle of it was a woman with dark, intense eyes. Oh no, she was not looking at the camera. She was looking at my sculpture. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached out and pulled the canvas shroud off of Echo. My masterpiece was revealed, bathed in the cold light of the studio. It was just as I had left it. Almost finished. Perfect. Then Anya turned to face the camera. There was no triumph in her eyes. No malice. Only a deep, profound sorrow. "Hello, Elian," she said, her voice clear and steady through the speakers. "I'm sorry, but a price must be paid. An echo for an echo." Behind her, another figure stepped out of the shadows. He was holding a heavy sledgehammer. Anya gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The man raised the sledgehammer high above his head, positioning himself in front of my sculpture, in front of my soul. And as I watched, helpless, from 1,000 miles away, trapped in another man's body, he began to swing. The betrayal was not that she had used me. The betrayal was this. This was the price of her revenge. The sound that tore from my throat was not a word. It was a raw, primal noise of absolute agony, the sound of a part of my soul being ripped away. I lunged toward the screen as if I could physically pass through it, as if I could stop the inevitable. Isla grabbed my arm, her own gasp of horror echoing in the silent, opulent room. On the screen, the sledgehammer descended. The first blow struck Echo on the shoulder. The sound was a sickening crack, a sound I knew intimately, the sound of stone giving way, of form being broken. But this wasn't the controlled, creative fracture of a chisel. It was a brutal, destructive violation. A white scar appeared on the smooth, gray surface of the sandstone. The man swung again, and again. Each impact was a physical blow to me. I saw chunks of my life's work, of my very essence, explode and fall to the dusty floor. The reaching arm shattered. The delicate curve of the neck disintegrated. The hollowed-out chest, the symbolic heart of the piece, was caved in with a deafening crunch. Through it all, Anya stood and watched, her face a mask of resolute grief. She was not reveling in this destruction. She was enduring it. This was a sacrifice, a ritual, an echo for an echo. She had made me destroy Arthur's legacy, and in return, she was destroying mine. It was a terrible, perfect, and utterly insane symmetry. I fell to my knees, my strength gone. The man in the video kept swinging until my masterpiece, my echo, was nothing more than a jagged, unrecognizable ruin. A pile of broken stone on the floor of a dusty loft. He then dropped the sledgehammer with a final, metallic clang and retreated back into the shadows. Anya walked over to the rubble. She knelt down and picked up a single, small fragment. She held it in her palm, her fingers closing around it. Then, she looked directly into the camera again. Her eyes were not the eyes of a victor. They were the eyes of someone who had just lost as much as I had. He destroyed my life's work, Elian, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The sustainable farming tech I was developing, it could have fed millions. He bought it, buried it, and salted the earth so nothing could grow again, all for profit. I needed you to understand that kind of loss. The feeling of watching your soul's work turn to dust. I needed you to become the hammer. I'm sorry it had to be this way. Truly, the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than any stone. I remained on the floor, not moving, not breathing. Everything I had done, the risks I had taken, the man I had become, it had all led to this, to the annihilation of the one thing that defined me. Isla knelt beside me, her hand on my back. She said nothing. What was there to say? She had witnessed the murder of my soul. Hours passed. The city lights outside blurred into a meaningless pattern. The rage came first, a white-hot, blinding inferno. I wanted to destroy her as she had destroyed me. I wanted to use the full power of Arthur Vance, the corporate and legal machinery at my disposal, to hunt her down and tear her life apart. But as the rage subsided, it left behind something far worse, a vast, hollow emptiness. The fear of forgetting who I was had been replaced by the reality that the most important part of me was already gone. What was a sculptor without his sculpture? What was I without Echo? It was in that abyss of despair that a thought, a terrible and seductive choice, began to form. The Sanctuary Project. The data slate was still in my possession, hidden in the apartment. Arthur's plan. The protocol to trigger a cascade failure in the transfer signal. The one-way ticket to a new identity. Arthur had intended to use it to escape with Leo, but I could use it for myself. The next reciprocity was just over 2 months away. I could finalize the preparations. I could activate the protocol. I would never be Elian again. I would be permanently severed from my old life, from the man whose greatest work now lay in ruins. I would remain here in this body. I would be Arthur Vance. The thought was both horrifying and intoxicating. I would have wealth, power. I would be safe from the consequences of what I had done, from any lingering threat from Anya or the cartographers. And I would be with Isla and Leo. I looked at Isla, her face etched with worry in the dim light. Over the past few months, our strange alliance had blossomed into a fragile, genuine bond. We had saved each other. We understood each other in a way no one else could. And Leo, the boy had burrowed his way into my heart. The idea of leaving him, of returning him to the care of a new stranger, was a pain second only to the loss of my art. If I stayed, I could be a father to him, a real one. I could be a partner to Isla, building a new life on the ashes of Arthur's old one. We could be a family. It was a life I had never wanted, never even conceived of, but it was a life of connection, of love. A life to fill the hollow space inside me. All I had to do was let Elian die. For days, I was a ghost. I went through the motions at work, my mind 1,000 miles away, weighing the impossible choice. Return to a life of rubble, to a studio that was now a tomb, or stay here in this gilded cage and learn to call it home. One evening, I found Leo in his room, sitting at his desk. He was surrounded by popsicle sticks, glue, and string. He was building something, a small, intricate model of a cantilever bridge. He had used triangles just as I had told him. "Hey," I said softly from the doorway. He looked up, a proud smile on his face. "Dad, look, it's strong." He gently pressed on the center of the bridge. It held firm. "It's because of the triangles. You were right." I walked over and sat on the edge of his bed, studying his creation. It was clever, intuitive. He had the eye. He had the hands. "It's very good, Leo," I said, my voice thick. "It's a beautiful structure. When you go back," he said suddenly, his voice small, "will the next dad know how to build bridges?" The question struck me with the force of a physical blow. He knew. Of course, he knew. He was 9, not stupid. He had lived with the cold, distant Arthur, and then he had lived with me. He understood the shift better than anyone. "I don't know, Leo," I answered honestly. "I hope so," he said, not looking at me. "I like building things." He paused, then looked up at me, his eyes wide and serious. "I'll miss you, Elian Dad." Elian Dad. The name was a perfect, innocent summation of the impossible situation. He knew I was not his father, but he had accepted me as one anyway. He had seen the man behind the mask, the sculptor, the storyteller, and he didn't want him to leave. That conversation was the tipping point. The love for this boy, the bond we had forged, it was more real and more solid than any stone I had ever carved. Echo was gone. The past was a pile of dust. But here was a future, a life to be built. I made my decision. I would activate the sanctuary protocol. I would stay. I would choose this life, this family. I would choose to be Arthur Vance. Elian Rousseau, the sculptor, would die on the night of the reciprocity. It was a suicide of the soul, but it felt like the only way to survive. That night, I retrieved the data slate. I spent hours studying the protocol, the final sequences I would need to initiate. It was complex, requiring precise timing and access to Ethelred's powerful network infrastructure, which I now controlled. It was possible. It was real. I went to Isla. She was in the living room, listening to the Bach cello suite. The mournful, beautiful notes filled the space. "I've made a decision," I said, my voice heavy. "I'm not going back." I explained the sanctuary project. I told her I could stay. Permanently. She listened, her expression unreadable. I expected relief, joy, something. But instead, her face was filled with a profound sadness. "You would do that?" she asked softly. "You would kill Elian to stay here?" "Elian is already dead," I said, the words tasting like ash. "His work is gone. His life is gone. There's nothing to go back to. Here, there's you. There's Leo. There's a life to be lived." "No," she said, standing up and shutting off the music. The silence was sudden and absolute. "You're wrong. Elian is not dead. He's standing right in front of me. He's the man who told my son bedtime stories about sculptors. He's the man who saw the beauty in a crystal vase. He's the man who taught a boy about triangles." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with an intensity one had never seen before. "The man who defeated Marcus Thorne. That was Arthur," she said. "The cold, calculating strategist. But the man who chose to fight for us, for me and Leo, that was Elian. He did it not for power, but because it was the right thing to do. Don't you see? You haven't been erased. You haven't been assimilated. You've grown. She reached out and took my hands, Arthur's hands, in hers. Your sculpture is gone, Elian, and that is a tragedy beyond words. But an artist is not what he has made. An artist is the capacity to make it, the vision, the soul. They destroyed the stone, but they didn't destroy the sculptor. He's still in there. He's stronger than you think. Her words chipped away at the cold resolve I had built around my heart. If you stay, she continued, her voice breaking, if you choose to be Arthur, you'll be making the same choice he made. You'll be choosing the cage. You'll be killing the best part of yourself. For us. And I can't let you do that. I won't be your jailer. This was my choice, not the one I thought I was making. It wasn't a choice between a dead past and a living future. It was a choice between two versions of myself. The man who gives up his soul for love and security, or the man who holds onto his soul, even if it means returning to a world of pain and loss. Could I go back? Could I face the ruins of my life's work and find the strength to start again? Or should I take the easier path, the path of love and comfort, even if it meant living a lie for the rest of my days? Isla squeezed my hands. The choice is yours, Elian. But choose as the sculptor, not as the executive. Choose the man you want to be, not the man you think we need. And in that moment of terrible, beautiful clarity, I knew what I had to do. The hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than carving stone. Harder than facing down a boardroom. I had to choose which man would die on the night of the reciprocity. Was it to be Arthur Vance, the ghost I inhabited? Or Elian Rousseau, the artist who had lost everything? The final weeks passed in a strange, bittersweet peace. The decision, once made, settled in my soul with the weight and permanence of granite. I would not activate the sanctuary protocol. I would not murder Elian to give Arthur Vance an artificial eternity. I would go home, Isla, and I never spoke of the choice again, but a new understanding flowed between us. The frantic, desperate energy was replaced by a quiet, profound tenderness. We were no longer co-conspirators. We were two people cherishing a finite, borrowed time. We spent the evenings talking, not about corporate strategy or secret plots, but about art, music, and dreams. I spoke of the raw, elemental beauty of the quarry, and she played her cello for me, filling the sterile apartment with a rich, vibrant voice she had silenced for so long. We were giving each other back the pieces of themselves they had lost. My time with Leo became sacred. We built more bridges, more towers, graduating from popsicle sticks to intricate balsa wood kits. I taught him how to see the world as a sculptor does, to notice the lines, the textures, the play of light and shadow on ordinary objects. I wasn't just teaching him a hobby, I was giving him a language, a way of seeing. I was arming him with the creativity and passion his biological father had tried to extinguish. In a way, I was sculpting him not from stone, but from love and attention, hoping the form would hold long after I was gone. One afternoon, he came to me with a small, lumpy bar of soap and a plastic knife. "Teach me," he said, his eyes full of determination. "Teach me to carve." And so, on the balcony overlooking the pristine city of Geneva, I showed a 9-year-old boy how to find the shape within the block. We carved a clumsy, lopsided bird. It was crude, imperfect, but to me, it was the most beautiful sculpture in the world. It was a piece of my soul that I could leave behind. I prepared my own continuity guide for the next person to inhabit Arthur's life. It was different from the one I had received. Alongside the passwords and corporate data, I wrote a personal letter. "To whoever you are," it began, "you have inherited a life of immense power and privilege. But this life is a house with ghosts. Do not let them haunt you. Find the woman who plays the cello in the evenings and listen to her music. Find the boy who builds bridges and ask him about the strength of triangles. This life is not in the boardroom on the 82nd floor. It is here, in these rooms. Do not make the mistake of looking for it in the wrong place. P.S. The man who lived here before you was a sculptor. Remember that. It's important." I also took the data slate from the lockbox, the sanctuary file, the list of cartographers, the proof of the system's manipulation, and I sealed it in a secure digital vault. I sent the key and a long, detailed explanation to a single recipient, the Mandate Authority Oversight Representative who had presided over Marcus's downfall. I didn't know if she was trustworthy, if she was part of the problem or part of the solution. But I had to believe that truth, like a seed, would eventually find a crack in the pavement to grow. I had no interest in revolution. My only desire was to protect this family and return to the silence of my own life. The final night arrived. The last day of the 365. The apartment was quiet. I tucked Leo into bed. He held onto my hand tightly. "Will I ever see you again, Ellie and Dad?" he whispered. "No, Leo," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "But every time you build something, every time you make something beautiful with your hands, a part of me will be there. I promise." He gave me the lopsided soap bird. "For you, so you don't forget us." I stood with Isla by the window, the city a river of light below. We didn't touch. We just stood side by side, sharing the final moments. "Thank you, Elian," she said softly, "for giving me my life back, for giving Leo a father, even for a little while." "Thank you, Isla," I replied, "for reminding me who I am." The wristcom began to glow. The low hum filled the room. I closed my eyes. My last sight in this world was Isla's face, a sad, beautiful smile gracing her lips. My last feeling was the clumsy soap bird clutched in my hand. The vertigo, the dissolution, the feeling of being unwritten. Then dust. The familiar, beloved smell of dust, old stone, and turpentine filled my lungs. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the center of my loft. My loft. The late afternoon sun, my sun, slanted through the grimy windows. I looked down at my hands. My hands. Calloused, stained, familiar. They were home. I was weak, disoriented. My body, which had been inhabited by an agroanalyst for a year, felt strange, the muscles unused to the specific strains of my work. But it was mine. My gaze was drawn to the center of the room, to the place where Echo had stood. A part of me still expected to see the ruins, the rubble from the video feed. But it wasn't rubble. The floor was swept clean. And in the center of the studio, on a newly built pedestal, sat a single, enormous, uncut block of black marble. It was magnificent, a perfect, unblemished cube, radiating a deep, silent power. It was a sculptor's dream, a new beginning. On the pedestal, propped against the stone, was a data slate and a small, handwritten note. I picked up the note first. The handwriting was elegant, precise. "Elian, I know you will never forgive me. I don't ask you to. What I did was monstrous, but my grief made me a monster. I needed you to feel my loss, so you could become the weapon I needed. It was a cruel, selfish act, and it almost cost you your soul. But I watched you. I watched you through the back doors the cartographers built. I saw you with Isla and Leo. I saw you become a father. I saw you choose to protect them instead of chasing power. I saw you become a better man in Arthur Vance's skin than he ever was. And I saw Isla's choice, and then yours. You chose to come back. To the ruins. To the pain. To the artist's struggle. That choice, it shamed me. It showed me that true creation is not about revenge, but about resilience. It's about starting again. An echo for an echo. I destroyed your past. It is only right that I give you a future. This stone is from a private quarry my family has owned for generations. It is the finest carving marble in the world. Your successor, the real agroanalyst, was a good man who took care of your plants. I have taken care of this. I have dismantled my corner of the cartographers. The truth you sent to the authority will do the rest. The game is over. What you do now is up to you. Goodbye, Elian. Create something beautiful, not for revenge, not as an echo of what was lost, but for its own sake. Oh no, my legs gave out, and I sat on the floor, my hand resting on the cold, smooth surface of the new stone. The rage, the grief, it was all still there, but it was joined by something else, a profound, aching, and deeply human sense of grace. The reciprocity was meant to teach empathy through a shared mile in another's shoes. But it was a flawed, manipulated system. True empathy, I now understood, was not about walking in someone else's life. It was about seeing your own life reflected in their suffering and choosing compassion over retribution. Anya, in her own broken way, had finally learned that. And so had I. I had lost my masterpiece. But I had gained what? A deeper understanding of myself. The knowledge that my identity was not held in a single piece of stone, but in my hands, my heart, and the impact I had on others. I had been a son, a husband, a father. I had been a corporate predator and a savior. I had contained multitudes. The man who had left this studio a year ago was not the same man who had returned. I clutched the small, lopsided soapbird Leo had given me. It was the most precious thing I owned. I looked at the black marble. It was a void, a silence, an ending and a beginning. It held infinite possibilities. I did not know what I would carve. The form was not yet clear. It would not be echo. It would be something new, something born of fire and loss, of love and betrayal, something that knew the weight of two lives. Slowly, I got to my feet. I walked over to my leather tool roll and unfurled it. My chisels and hammers were clean, gleaming, waiting for me. I picked up my favorite mallet, its wooden handle worn smooth and familiar. The weight of it in my hand was the weight of my own soul returned to me. I stood before the great, black stone, mallet in one hand, a new chisel in the other. The setting sun cast my long shadow across its surface. For a moment, I saw all of them in the stone's reflection. Arthur, Isla, Leo, Anya. Ghosts and echoes. Then they faded, leaving only my own face, older and sadder, but with a new light in the eyes. I took a deep breath, the dust of a new beginning filling my lungs. I raised the hammer, and with a steady hand, I made the first mark. A choice, a beginning, a promise. The sound of the chisel striking the marble echoed in the quiet studio. It was the sound of a man starting over.